Well, hey everybody, welcome to Celebration Bar Review. My name is Jackson Mummy. We're in the midst of our countdown series, actually just getting it underway, and this week's message is designed to be watched or listened to at about 120 days or 4 months until your bar exam. Wow. For some of you, 120 days, 4 months, that would seem like a very long period of time. And you might be saying to yourself, well, I've really got a lot of time. I don't really need to start my studies for another few weeks, or I can go kind of leisurely right now. Yeah, I'd like that to be true, but the truth is the less you do now, the more you'll have to do later. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this later in the message, but I think that most people that are taking the bar probably view this 120-day point as the more formal and typical starting point, certainly in our course, and I would say more and more over the years. From the old days when people used to study for maybe 5 or 6 weeks, now it's stretched out to about 4 months for most people. This is the time when you really start to get into gear. And if you're in one of our Celebration Bar Review courses, generally you're going to have between 200 and 300 hours worth of study to get through all of your course materials. That is the lectures, the reading, the question practice, and the review. And so this is a good time to start. Now, when you figure out what it means in terms of being 18 weeks away from the test, 120 days, you're talking about something like 15 hours of study per week. And for me, that's a pretty reasonable amount of time. Certainly if you're still in school, or if you've got a job, or if you've got family commitments, or all of the above, which sounds familiar to many of you, or even just some of the above. And I think most people, given the anxiety of a bar student, would say, oh, 4 months, maybe that's not enough time. But in fact, it's plenty of time if it's used wisely. So what I want to focus on a little bit here is what's a wise use of time for those 4 months. And to begin with that, the first thing I want to do is to talk about what's not a good use of your time first. Oh, that drives people crazy when I do that, but let's talk about that first. First of all, memorization is not a good use of your time. Not at all, not ever, no way, no how. It's not for the bar exam. Anything that you foolishly tried to memorize today, even assuming that that's what the bar examiners wanted, and I have spent hours and hours in other places talking about why it is not what they want, but even if it was what you think they wanted, if you were trying to memorize something today, it is highly unlikely that you're going to remember it 4 months from now. So if you're thinking you're going to do a slow, detailed reading of outlines, that's not going to help you. Memorization is not going to help you. The slower you read, actually, the worse you're going to keep material in your brain. It's an interesting phenomenon of the brain, but faster reading actually has higher retention. So, number 1, don't memorize. Number 2, don't do a slow, detailed reading. Number 3, a slow, detailed listening or watching of the lectures simply won't be that helpful for you for exactly the same reason. So, you're just not going to be able to retain information for 4 months if that's the approach you take. Now, the alternative to that is what's called spaced or stepped repetition, which means taking a small body of material, being exposed to it, then giving yourself some time away from that material, adding a bit of new material to it, repeating what you saw before, and then waiting some time, and then adding some new material, repeating what you've done before, and you continue up the stair steps, the ladder, if you will, over a period of time. That replaces memorization with knowledge, and it replaces early study that would be meaningless if you were trying to hold it all in your brain with something that's more productive and more valuable. Well, what else is not a good use of your time right now? Well, pretty obviously, needless anxiety or worrying about what your scores are, whether or not your essays are passing 4 months before the exam, or whether you're getting a predetermined number of multi-state questions correct. At this stage, that's all useless information, and it's totally needless anxiety. You are going to improve, you are going to get better, and that's the point of having these 4 months of study still ahead of you. Now, what is useful right now? Well, I would say that the first thing you want to do is to get a sense of the scope of the exam that you're going to take. You're also going to want to begin to learn newer skills. If you're in our course, you're going to potentially learn how to photo read or how to write in a different style than you might have had in law school or at work, and you're going to get a handle on how those skills work. If you've never taken performance tests before, you're going to have to be exposed to that and begin to understand that task as well. In general, I would say that you want to worry less about the substance of law and how much law you know at this stage, and be more interested in the mechanics and the structure. Do you know the rules of how to write an essay? Do you understand structurally how to complete a performance test? Do you understand the steps necessary to analyze and answer successfully a multi-state question? Those are better, more useful skills because they're the skills that you're going to apply all the way through your studies, regardless of what the substance of study itself turns out to be. Now, to me, the analogy of this is a little bit like building a house. Right now we're at the framing stage, and we've poured a foundation, or we're about to pour a foundation for most people, and right now what we're doing is we're framing. We're putting up the outside exterior walls and beginning to do some of the interior framing. Yeah, I know, I've been around too many people building homes, I guess, right now. But people sometimes ask me really detailed questions at this stage of their study about things that they want to know about how to write and subtleties of the writing and subtleties of the study. And the truth is, when we're this far away from the exam, it's a little bit like, to complete my analogy of the house, it's like talking about where the cabinets ought to be placed or the color of the backsplash before you got the walls up on the exterior of the house. It's really just not a very fruitful discussion to have this early. So I think what you want to be doing right now is to focus on the mechanics. You want to get a sense of how to get underway and how to be working. If you haven't chosen a bar review, this is the time to do it. If you have chosen a bar review, you got to start figuring out how they want you to study and what that means and how you're going to implement that. If you're studying right now, starting your studies, this is a good time to also begin to build some habits about how you study. In other words, do you want to study at lunch? Or do you want to get up an hour earlier in the morning or study on the weekends or at home after dinner? Whatever those times are, begin to set them aside and make them your, what I call, sacred study times. And by sacred, I don't mean religious. I simply mean that they're the hours that you don't allow disturbances. You make it study time. But by the same token, if it's sacred study time, then there's sacred work time, there's sacred family time, there's sacred community time. There's a lot of things. Make your time relevant to what you're doing. So the more routine that you can make these schedules, the better off I think you'll be. The other thing that you should be doing right now, and it might surprise some of you, I suppose, but I think you need to be well-rounded when you begin the study process. And by well-rounded, I mean both physically, spiritually, and mentally. In terms of physical fitness, I'm a firm believer that exercise, daily exercise, is very important. Now, I'm not a gym rat. I'm a former fatty, and as someone who's seen the impact and benefit of working out, I can tell you that if you love the gym, go to the gym. If you don't love the gym, get out and walk, or ride a bike, or walk on a treadmill, or go swimming. Do something, but get out of your place where you're studying. Give yourself some physical exercise on a regular basis. It's important to do it. It actually helps the learning, and we'll talk a lot more about that as we get further along in our course. I'm actually excited about the brain research that's going on these days, and it clearly ties together the ability to learn, retain information, and actually, in some cases, even reduce disabilities like ADHD and improve concentration based on physical exercise, both aerobic and anaerobic exercise. So that's an important thing for you to be doing and starting that habit now. What about spiritually? Well, I think this is a great time to get in touch really with why you're taking a bar exam. I had a conversation with a student recently who's had the materials for a while and hasn't really gotten started yet. And I talked about the problem with them and asked, why are you doing this? What's the benefit to you of passing the bar versus the possible risk or downside of not passing? In fact, in our webinar that we teach, we ask people, would passing the bar make a difference in your life? And the answers are extraordinarily powerful that people give. The truth is, almost everyone has a good reason for taking and passing the bar, but we're not always stopping to think about that or articulate it or maybe even verbalize it to ourselves. And so I think it's important to get a sense of why you're doing this, because the reality is you are going to be giving up some things over the next 4 months. There are going to be some activities you can't do, some time you can't spend with other people, and you want to spiritually get in touch with what your purpose is and what your goals are. Now, if you have a relationship with the God of your understanding, this is a pretty good time to start cementing it. I promise you, over the next 4 months, you're going to be spending more time in prayer than you expected. And if you don't have a relationship with a God of your understanding, then maybe it's a good time to start thinking about one. You know, the old line is that there are no atheists in foxholes. I would add to that, or at the bar exam. So it's a good time to start thinking about spirituality. The power of meditation, which we incorporate into our course, the power of prayer, the power of centering yourself is incredibly important, and I'd spend some time on those items as well. And then as you begin to learn and work through the materials themselves, I think you're going to pick up greater skills in terms of the work and the study habits themselves. So you begin to build this basis. You're actually putting a foundation in and starting to frame the core of your studies. You have a lot to do, but you have a long time to get it done. And I'll tell you that from where I sit, 4 months is forever. If you're in our course, you'll be sick of me in 4 months, and we have a lot of work together to do to get accomplished. If you're not in our course, I can tell you 4 months is still a long time, but this is the time to make your decisions and start moving forward. And I encourage you either way, if you've been thinking about what you're going to do or when you want to start, this is the time to do it. Now, I can tell you that our courses are rapidly filling up. And at 120 days out, we have a lot of students already beginning to study and relatively fewer spaces available for students. And if you're thinking to yourself, oh man, it's too late, well, it's not too late. That's one of the beauties of home study is that you can always begin at a later date and pick up from there. You can put in more hours, but to get the maximum impact, to have the best results, this is the time that you should be getting started. And so I really want to encourage you to do that. Now, if you've got questions about how to do it, by all means, contact us. If you're in our course, jump on our private Facebook group and ask your questions there. And if you're not in our course, then I invite you to contact us, and we'll be glad to talk with you about those different strategies and options that might be available. In any event, have a happy 4-month, 120-day mark to the bar exam. Start getting that house framed up, and we'll see you next week. Thanks.